Welcome into Double Overtime presented by VC Ultimate. Sascha, we're back again. Western Ultimate League season all done, at least for the regular season. Still waiting on Championship Weekend to come the first weekend of June. More Premier Ultimate League action, but it's the middle of the College Championships. D3 Nationals just wrapped up as we are recording this on Tuesday, May 23rd. Congratulations to Middlebury women and Colorado College men for taking down those titles. Still to be decided D1 over Memorial Day weekend. I will be out in Cincinnati. I think it's maybe technically Mason, Ohio. But Cincinnati for the D1 College Champs. We will see who takes it down. Sascha, glad to be here with you again. What do you think? Is UNC going to repeat again? It's on both sides.
It's hard not to. I mean, women's side, 100%. I think we're going to get a repeat of the possibly like the Colorado UNC. That was the final last year, right?
That was close. Okay. I think it was like basically universe.
Yeah, I think it
wasn't just straight up universe.
I think we're going to get a repeat with that. On the men's side, it's not like I don't think we can like write it in stone that UNC will win, but it's hard not to bet against them.
I mean, they certainly seem heavy favorites. I mean, we saw Middlebury women do their own three-peat. We'll see if Pleiades follow up this upcoming weekend. We've got a short show for you this evening. We will be joined by two members of the Western Ultimate League stats team to talk the Western Ultimate League stats hub. Lots of really great information, not just goals, assists, blocks, really advanced stats. We're going to get some behind-the-scenes look, hear about what their most interesting stat is, the information that you may not know that might give you the most insight as to who some of the key players are in the Western Ultimate League. We're going to have the interview coming up in just a moment, Sascha. We have to talk a little bit about the Premier Ultimate League. There's been a whole thing. I don't know how much folks have been following it, but if you're listening to this podcast, you probably have been following the questions around who is making Championship Weekend, the qualifying criteria, the numerous tiebreakers. In the end, congratulations officially per the Premier Ultimate League Twitter to Raleigh Radiance and DC Shadow for making it to Championship Weekend. Sascha, we got a little bit of a mulligan. We said that Minnesota Strike had made Championship Weekend because we were going off of like overall record because that's intuitive. That's not the case. They haven't earned it yet. They have to beat Milwaukee in a couple of weeks to confirm their place. Thoughts briefly, and then we'll do a quick rundown of the games. We'll give more information and detail next week when we do a Western Ultimate League Champ Weekend preview and a review of it will be 7 Premier Ultimate League games of the past 2 weeks.
I think it's weird. I think it's funky. That's about all I can say without getting super deep into it this week.
Yeah, we're trying to keep things a little light this time around, in between all of the national stuff, all of the Ultra World staff working really hard to bring all of the production from D3 and D1 Nationals. So we're trying to make it a little bit easy on them. So a quick review of the just top line results that you may have seen on socials. The big news, New York beats DC 19-17 in New York. Gridlock. Again, we'll get into it later. Losing on the fourth tiebreak for making up spot in Championship Weekend. Columbus at Minnesota. Minnesota Strike win 16-10. Austin at home beats Atlanta 24-11. Philly at home beats Portland 14-10. And the only road team to win, Raleigh at Nashville, wins 21-18. That was a great game. Gives Radiance the South Division title. So again, we're going to talk more about those games in depth next week. In the meantime, we are going to take a quick break before we are joined by Ben Sadis and Ryan Kindell of the Western Ultimate League stats team. Again, really excited for this interview. Hope folks enjoy. We're going to take a quick break. When we come back, talking Western Ultimate League stats. Welcome back to Double Overtime presented by VC Ultimate. We are now joined by two members of the Western Ultimate League stats team, Ben Sadis and Ryan Kindell. Ben and Ryan, welcome to the show.
Thanks for having us.
It's great to be here.
So y'all are two members of the Western Ultimate League stats team, but I think from our brief conversations before jumping on for this interview, neither of you are necessarily super directly connected to the league. So how did the two of you get into this? What's your ultimate background? Tell us a bit more about yourselves. Let's start with Ryan.
Yeah, so I have been playing Ultimate since high school. I've gotten more involved in supporting the women's leagues as they've come around, and as part of the hosting team for the Columbus Pride in their first season, helping out with the game clock and learning all of the mechanics to what that looked like. And then once I realized that they weren't doing PUL standings last year, started making the standings every week, updating those on Twitter, and then the Western Ultimate League reached out to me asking if I wanted to do more of the stats-based kind of stuff based on the work that I've been doing for the PUL on a volunteer basis. And then, I got connected there, got to be a part of this team, help develop some of the stats stuff, running WUL Insider, and just generally helping spark some of those conversations that continue to go on throughout the league.
Awesome. We have the WUL Insider account revealed. Finally. Wow. Name behind the account. Great. Ben, who are you? Why are you here?
Yeah, so it's a great question. I started playing Ultimate in college at Michigan, and I've always been a stats nerd for all the sports I'd played. So yeah, go Blue, Ryan. So once I got kind of more into it, I kind of looked for ways to. I noticed that, like we all talk about often, I think the stats world in Ultimate is still pretty new, pretty barren. Like lots of people have the goals, the assists, the blocks, not much more than that. So I started looking for ways to kind of just enhance my own understanding and the fun I was having with the game by trying to see where I could dig into more with stats. So for my college team, for my club team, I started doing some stuff, tracking stats, seeing what kind of data I could get, what kind of analytics I could produce. And then I decided it'd be kind of fun to do that at more of a larger scale for a kind of a bigger organization. So I was talking to some WL folks, and they were kind of looking for something like that. So it became a good match, I guess, and I started working with them.
Awesome. Glad to have both of you on the show. So on the stats hub, I don't know how much people have seen this. You should check it out. You can get to it from the main Western Ultimate League website page. I think it's still under schedule, and then it's like WUL Stats Hub. There is so much information here. For folks, I'm going to try and describe what I am seeing in front of me via audio. You can view players from one team or all teams. You can select one player or view all. You have game stats, you have season stats, you have per game stats, you have advanced stats and standard stats. Ryan, Ben, if someone was new to this hub, where would you recommend that they start?
That's a good question. Because I think it kind of depends what you're looking for, I suppose. One thing we were thinking about when we were making this is always is that balance between, you want to show too much information and people might get overloaded, or do you want to have too little information and people might be asking for more? So we kind of, I think, ended up defaulting on, more is better than less. We want to have all the information out there for people to use if they want it. So there's a lot there. I would say if, you're just kind of looking to get into stats and you're trying, especially if you want to see in the context of like the WL, if you're following the league, you're following the players, you want to see, what are these players doing? I would go to the player page, which is one of the tabs at the top, and just look for your favorite player, right? Like if your favorite player is like Paige Kircher for Utah, who's had a great season, search her up, look at her stats, look at the charts, how it presents the data. We have some pretty cool radar charts, which kind of show you like, where does this player throw, what side of the field, how many hucks do they throw, what's their completion percentage under those different throws, and save for when they're receiving. So I think it kind of just gives a pretty cool overview of what a player's been doing for the season, and then you go from there.
I think with that, on the team side of things, I think it's pretty easy to get into what it looks like to do a deep dive sorted by goals per game or goals allowed per game, goal differential, stuff like that, and get a feel for how those particular metrics tend to play out in terms of a team's overall record. So if you're looking, okay, are the teams with the best records the teams that are completing the most hucks per game? Are they the teams that are completing the most breakside throws? Are they the teams that are turning it over the fewest, hucking the most, all of those kind of things? And I think diving into those a little more deeply has helped me understand a little bit better on a broader perspective what things, at least in the WUL, are indicative of team record success versus what are more indicative of kind of things that seem like outliers.
So I guess my thought when I first was looking at the when you get to the player page and you have the throwing and receiving radar is I feel like it makes it easier to scout certain players and teams now. And that's something that we don't really see a lot of in Ultimate. It's mostly just like watching film. Like you got to watch the film and try to figure it out the best you can. And now we have these stats and you can like look at the stats and look at the film as well and figure out, I guess, what can we do to stop Paige Kircher from getting an open side under or getting a dump, because those are her biggest percentages. So that was really interesting to me. I guess my question is what is the most interesting / I guess favorite stat for both of you that we can see, I guess?
Man, it's like picking your favorite child, Sascha. Like, you can't choose one. I would say the goal for every stats nerd, right, is to find that one like golden stat, right? The one stat that like describes everything and says, the player with this stat that's the best player. Right? If you're like a baseball nerd, you have like wins above replacement is like kind of came onto the scene like pretty recently as like this is the stat. Like if the players who are the best at this stat are the best ones. I don't think we're there yet in Ultimate. Obviously, it's a very new field for us. Like we're trying to do certain things. Ultiworld produces the edge stat. For WL, we have a kind of simplified version, offensive impact score, to look at just general offensive production. I really like looking at yards per turnover. Right, you can count yards, but players who also throw a lot of turnovers, the yards they're throwing, that's not very helpful. So one thing that I think that I was very happy to get for this year is if you take just yards, we now also have what we call effective yards, which is like the yards you've produced, but also the yards you produced when you've thrown incompletions. And that just kind of helps balance players like, say, handlers who huck a lot, who might be throwing turnovers downfield that are much less penalize our team much less than people who are dropping the disc. Because dropping the disc is like, you're just giving away a free possession, whereas hucking and turning over, at least other teams to work up the whole field before they get back to where you were. So we have this stat called effective yards per turnover, which takes effective yards divides by turnovers, and kind of gives a good idea of the players that are pushing this down the field the most per every time they give the disc to the other team. That's what I'm going to go with.
I've really just generally enjoyed the possession-based metrics. I feel like that's something that I haven't seen a lot of in other league-based stats, especially in Ultimate, in terms of, so thinking about somebody who has very few receptions per offensive possession or very few like goals or assists per offensive possession or blocks per defensive possession. I think it's something where you can see somebody who plays 100, 150, 200, whatever possessions may have higher stats based on the fact that they're just playing a tremendous amount versus somebody who might have fewer points played or be on a defensive line that's not getting as many blocks, not getting as many opportunities. But as a D-line handler, seeing the D-line handlers that have high defense or high offensive possession based assist rates or goal rates, seeing the opportunities, seeing players taking advantage of the opportunities that are given to them, especially maybe on somebody whose team isn't generating a lot of defensive stops. and not giving them as many offensive possessions, or someone coming in with a little bit less playing time, a little bit fewer opportunities to be able to go out and make plays. I think being able to see possession-based statistics gives a lot more valuable information than just sheer quantity of data or quantity of stats.
Yeah. Can we talk about the effective yards again? Like, what does it mean throwing yards on incompletions? Like, what exactly does that mean?
It means if you take the yards that the disc goes forward on the pass, on a throw that was incomplete, so where it's player threw it to where it landed, that's the thrown yards on the incompletion. So for our normal yards, we just count completed passes and we say how far did this move forward, like down the field. So how many vertical yards did it gain? And for effective yards, we just do the same thing, but we also count the times when the disc turned over. And yeah.
Gotcha. So you could look at someone's yardage and then also look at their effective yards and see, like, I guess, how much they actually do throw.
Like a player who's really hucking a lot is going to have a much higher effective yard total than their just like normal yards, because they're going to be throwing a lot of hucks at turnover. And even though they're giving the disc to the other team, at least they're doing it, 50 yards downfield, as opposed to a player who's throwing turnovers in the reset space who might be giving the disc back to the other team already close to their own end zone.
Yeah, and that's something where if you look at the difference between effective yards and throwing yards, you're going to see the number of yards a player threw on the turnovers that they threw. So if somebody has one turnover and they have a 50-yard difference between effective yards and throwing yards, you know that turnover happened 50 yards downfield. And you can average that out and get a feel for, okay, somebody's got 75 more effective yards than throwing yards and 3 turnovers. That means their average turnover is 25 yards downfield, as opposed to somebody who might have a 10-yard difference between their effective yards and throwing yards, but they have 2 turnovers. So they're both 5 yards downfield. Maybe it's a misexecuted strike pass. Maybe it's a swing to get yards that didn't convert, something like that.
Gotcha. Okay. And for turnovers, we have like half turnovers. How is that calculated? Is that like they threw it, but it was receiver drop sort of thing?
Yeah. So we use that because there's a lot of situations in which, maybe the thrower throws a disc a little bit away from the receiver and like probably should be caught, but also it wasn't a good throw. So it's kind of like both players had a kind of bad situation there, but no one was completely at fault. So in that situation, we give it to, both, like each player gets a half turnover, not a full turnover. So just because of situations where, it feels like too penalizing to give either player a full turnover, we can kind of split it up. Or if it's like a miscommunication where 2 players are on a completely different page and, you could kind of harsh to penalize either of them fully for that turnover. So we split it up.
Sounds like a true handler.
Always a receiver.
Receiver error every time.
I feel like with stats, there's always like so much you can get into. Like Sascha, you're just asking like some questions about some of the stats, and feels like there's so much here between, again, the standard and advanced and per game and per season or what have you. I am also a fan of possession or game or something with some sort of like denominator so you equalize it out. But also it has its drawbacks. Like Melina Wiebe leading in goals per game with 5, played only 3 games. So, how do you weigh that out in terms of the different contributions of different players? So if there was a stat, y'all have sort of talked about some of your favorite stats, and maybe it's going to be the answer to this question as well. But sort of that, WAR wins over replacement, or wins above replacement technically, metric for baseball, is there a stat that leads us to find some of the most effective players, or maybe the players that maybe are, the unsung heroes, as it were, in the counting stats, the, maybe not racking up all of the goals, assists, and blocks, but it turns out they are super great possession handler and they have super high efficiency on offense or something. A, what are those stats? And B, what do they tell us about different players when players do well in those maybe more difficult to sort of capture stats in sort of the basic understanding of them?
Yeah, my short answer is there is no one stat for that. Now, obviously, like when you plug replacement in baseball, I think we can get there, but it'll definitely take a lot more definitely work time. We don't have it yet. I actually, just kind of a preview / example. The WL has given out official league awards this year to kind of the top players as voted on by various players, league members, etc. And I was using stats to help with that and to kind of find a list of like kind of the top players in the league. We use 7 different stats to kind of get an idea of who were the top performers, like league wide. So we didn't just use 1 or 2 or 3. We used 7 because we kind of determined that there was no just one stat we could use to look at this. However, I would say that a great start is things like offensive impact score, which just adds up goals, assists, yards, turnovers, and per possession. So just a simple per possession stat that uses your basic stats and gives you it at a per possession rate. I think that's a great place to start. Effective yards per turnover. Again, yards per turnover, just kind of moving down the field without turning the disc over. It's kind of the name of the game. And also, I do want to say, also look at something like usage. So that's just percent of touches that a team has that a player uses while they're on the field. So like if a player's on the field and their team throws 10 passes during that possession, the player uses 3 of them, then they have a 30% usage because they use 30% of the team's touches. That's really important because it's given the discrepancy in turnovers between handlers and cutters. Like it's easier to catch this than throw it, right? So handlers generally get a lot more turnovers assigned to them than cutters do. So if you can define those players who use the disc a lot, have really high usage, but still have those good per possession stats, those good turnover rates, that's kind of, if you can get some sort of merger of those stats, I think that's kind of like the golden, like the top of the list right now.
I will say I just went in to look at usage because I was curious. One, if folks want to go find it, it's under the advanced stats and it's all the way at the very, you have to like scroll all the way to the side. I noticed a couple of like small sample size players at the top. I don't know if either of you knows off the top of your head who, with more than one game played, who leads the league in usage. There's actually a tie between 2 players at 27.8. Y'all have any guesses? Or Sascha, do you have any guesses? Hint, one name has already been mentioned on this podcast.
I'm looking at it, so I can't guess.
I'm also looking at it, so I can't guess.
Ben, you're our only hope.
May have been mentioned Paige Kircher.
Paige Kircher. And actually, it's great because there's a representative from Utah, Paige Kircher, and there's a representative from the San Francisco Falcons. Sascha and I's teams both represented as the top usage with more than a game played.
Eliza Pugh?
I good guess. It's Meaty Chang, who also is just constant on the field. Yeah, other main handler for the Falcons. So yeah, it's really interesting. I encourage folks to go in and sort by any stat that you want to pull out. I know I got in before Ryan said that the stat that would be most useful to describe a player's impact.
That's all good. I think Ben has hit it well in terms of the overview of stats that are important to understanding players' overall impact, outside of the inability to have conclusive metrics for someone who is locking down their player on defense and is not getting thrown at because they're playing good enough defense. That is the stat that I will always wish existed and have no real conclusive metrical proof to back it up.
Here's
if your player's not open, you're not getting thrown to, you're not getting blocks.
I was going to say, here's the thing, Ryan. You say that the NBA has cameras in every single arena installed to do player tracking, and they're still figuring out how to do defensive metrics correctly. The NBA cameras, every arena, indoor sport, is still trying to figure out defensive stats. So you're in good company and when you're trying to figure out how to properly measure defensive contributions. I'm also a D-line player, so I feel the need and want for better capturing of defensive contributions.
For sure.
Bad news, you might have to wait a while.
I think that's probably true. I guess the other thing is, if you have questions about how some of these stats are calculated, reach out to WUL Insider, because if I don't know the answer, I can talk to Ben and get you the answer in terms of how this math is calculated, and hopefully help you have a better understanding of what some of these advanced stats look like, because as helpful as they are, they're not always the most intuitive, and sometimes they take an explanation with an example, and that's helpful. We want you all to have a better understanding of the amazing things these players are doing on the field, and we hope that our stats database is continuing to help do that better every day.
Yeah, sounds good. It's definitely a process, and we appreciate y'all taking the time to make this sort of stuff happen. I think and we may have one or two questions left, but definitely one that I'm sort of thinking about as we're talking about like maybe the future of stats. What does it mean, and what's the impact of having more useful, available, advanced stats for the sport of Ultimate? I think really the Western Ultimate League and the two of you and the rest of the WUL Stats team, everyone who's been contributing so far this season, is on the bleeding edge, as it were, in terms of Ultimate Analytics. You mentioned the edge statistic, but I still think there's a lot more to do, and I think this is a better data set than basically we've ever had.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, one of the things that I hope that we kind of get out of this moving forward is just having that kind of baseline of, in however many years, we'll always be able to look back and say, these were the numbers that were produced during the 2023 WUL season, right? Like Alex Diaz led the league with 25 goals in 3 years. Will anyone have scored more goals in the season? Who knows? But like, we'll have something to compare it to. We'll have something to like give a reference point to like what was going on, season in 2025 or something. So I think in that sense, like, even if we weren't able to put together all like this dashboard and, the more advanced stats, that sort of thing, at the end of the day, like having this data to start with, means that whatever you want to do in the future, it's kind of already available to do. So that's what I think, to me, is definitely one of the biggest things that I hope to get out of it. And I hope that this kind of helps us move forward in Ultimate with stats, just having this data available, and having, having information, basically.
Yeah, and I think about it from the game prep side of things, where the additional stats that we have access to through this database would be incredibly impactful if they were available across the board. You were talking about college nationals coming up. If people had college nationals data about puck percentages, breakthrough percentages, are people going deep, are they going under, who are the people that you want the disc in their hands because they have high turnover rates, who are the players that you don't want the disc in their hands because they're completing a ton of their shots, or even just thinking about WUL Championship Weekend coming up in a little bit. The top 2 hucking teams are in Championship Weekend, and the bottom 2 hucking teams are in Championship Weekend. So we have the 1, 2, 7, and 8 hucking teams matching up. Are we going to come out of this weekend seeing that the teams that huck the most are prevailing in their semis? Are the teams that huck the least prevailing in their semis? I think, just to ping one stat, I think that'll be fascinating to see how that plays out.
Who is where? And then let's talk more about Championship Weekend in a moment.
Place your bets.
Where we think? I think San Diego is got to be top 2 hucking team. I think probably San Diego and Utah would be my guess as the top, and then Seattle and San Francisco are 7-8.
Seattle and San Diego huck the most. Utah and Falcons huck the least. And as for fantasy game for Championship Weekend, we have that challenge which launched on the WUL Twitter last night, I believe. Basically, everyone who submits a team for Championship Weekend Fantasy, the link is pinned in the WUL Insider, and there will also be a post going up on the WUL website shortly with more information about how to join that contest. You pick your top 8 players from the Championship Weekend rosters. You have the opportunity to win a commemorative trophy indicating the excellence of your ability to pick people's fantasy stats for the weekend. That will count both games for all 4 teams. So semis, first place game, third place game. It's 1 goal or 1 point for goals and assists, 2 points for blocks, 1 point for every 100 throwing or receiving yards, minus 1 point for throwing turnovers and drops. Along with that, you have the opportunity to pick a captain for your team. Their points are doubled, and your 8th player is the opportunity to sub them in if for some reason there are player injuries or somebody isn't active for any particular game. So that's kind of the way it works. Along with that, everyone who submits a team will get to vote in the Fan Favorite Player Award. Those votes will be limited to people that play the fantasy game. So we want you to be able to have the opportunity to participate. We want to have a number of people competing to see who has the best knowledge. And for those of you who listen to Double Overtime, you're going to have an inside track on what metrics to look at.
Awesome. I'm really excited for fantasy. It was really fun to do it last year throughout the whole season. Really excited to do it for one weekend.
Yeah, and thank you both so much for joining us. We're going to take a quick break, but thank you again to Ryan and Ben for joining us. We're going to take a quick break. When we come back, we're doing quick picks review, quick picks for the only 2 Premier Ultimate League games happening this weekend. Oh my gosh, only 2. Our highlight of the week, and that will be all. Follow D1 Nationals. We'll talk a little bit more after this break. Again, thank you so much to Ben and Ryan for joining us. Our friends at VC Ultimate are proud to sponsor Double Overtime. VC proudly puts community over profit, focusing their support on initiatives that help promote inclusivity. As the first ever sponsor to back professional women's and non-binary Ultimate, VC puts its money where its mouth is when it comes to equitable action. VC also approaches product innovation intentionally to make more players feel like the Ultimate space is their own. Did you know that all VC core products are now 100% gender-free? If your team is in the market for uniforms or custom team gear, check out VCUltimate.com. Not only are they working to change the landscape of sport, VC's performance gear is the best on the field. Thanks to our sponsors of Double Overtime, VC Ultimate. And welcome back to Double Overtime, presented by VC Ultimate. I'm Jenna and joined by Sascha Vogel. We just had a great chat with Ben and Ryan from the Western Ultimate League stats team. There's so much there, Sascha. There's just so much there.
Stats are fun. They're complicated at times, but I think you can glean a lot of information from them, and they're fun to look at.
Yeah, really encourage folks to go look in the next week and a half or so before Championship Weekend. Again, get involved in fantasy. They've put together a lot of great stuff ahead of Championship Weekend, so check it all out. You got a little bit of time, do it between watching games of D1 College Nationals. I would say in between watching games of the Premier Ultimate League, but there's only 2 this upcoming weekend. And again, Sascha will talk more about this, but they're both out of division games, so I guess don't really matter to anything anymore. But from this past weekend, there were 5 games. We both went 3-2. We both got Minnesota winning against Columbus. Both got Philly winning against Portland. Both missed on New York beating DC. You picked Austin to beat Atlanta, and you were correct. And I picked Raleigh to beat Nashville, and I was correct. So I continue to hold a 4-pick lead against you as we get towards these closing stages. So let's do it. Let's just do a couple of quick picks, do highlight of the week, and get out of here so all of us can continue to get ready for the college championships, the D1 college championships, specifically. No shade to the D3 folks. 2 games, again, both out of division. Again, we'll talk more PUL next week, but out of division games, these probably weren't going to matter anyway at this point, but at least for the standings. But they're going to be played anyway, and should be at least some interesting games. Certainly The second one, first one though, Milwaukee at Portland. Milwaukee on the road. They do have a win on the season against Columbus. Sascha, are you going to pick them to get their second win of the season on the road at Portland?
No, I'm picking Portland.
Yeah, same. I mean, Portland did beat Austin already away, and their losses have pretty much just come to other East Division teams. I think Rising are good enough here to get the win over the traveling Monarchs. And then we have, I think it's going to be a pretty good game. I feel like these two teams played last season. I might be wrong about that, and I thought it was a pretty good game. Maybe I'm just remembering an entirely different game. This one, Indy Red.
No, you're right. They did play last season. I was there. I was at that game last year.
Ah.
I commentated it.
Oh, that's probably why I remember that it happened. Indy at Nashville. I guess I can pick first this time. Ooh, Indy's look pretty good. Nashville's look pretty good. It really depends on the rosters per usual. I will pick Nashville at home. The home teams won all but one of the games, and yes, Nashville lost at home, but that was against Raleigh. I think they can do it at home against Indy.
I'm also picking Nashville. I think they're great, and that I think they played like Raleigh's one of the closer games this season for Raleigh.
Certainly one of the higher scoring games. Raleigh played really close with Austin Torch, but
Yeah.
I feel like that was slightly lower scoring at least. So, yeah, Nashville's looked good. I think if they have some combination of Jesse Schaffner, Rachel Kramer, and one or two of their other top players, I think they should have enough to be able to fend off Indy, who will be traveling on the road over Memorial Day weekend. Last thing, highlight of the week.
Highlight of the week is, it's not really, I guess, one specific play. It's more of a whole possession, like a whole point. New York versus DC. The score is 13-14 in favor of New York. And at this point, I believe it's on serve. I'd have to go back and like scrub through everything, but it pretty close. DC is receiving. They're down by one. DC receives, starts working it up the field. Luisa Neves for New York gets a block on a tight upline throw. And then New York starts to work it back the other way. There was a big travel called on a huck. It comes back as they're trying to gain more yardage to get up the field. Blaise Sevier gets a nice from DC, gets a pretty sweet block on the sideline. And so DC starts getting pretty close to the end zone, and Jenny Faye gets overthrown in the end zone. So New York disc on the end zone. They start working it down the field, and Amy Zhu gets a really great throw from Anna Wyson on a deep huck, and she catches it, slides, is sitting on the goal line, comes up from on one knee and flips it to Sydney Harris for the break to go up 2. And that was like a huge turning point for the game for New York, and just kind of cemented their win, essentially. Like, there was about 9 minutes left on the clock at that point. The next point, they ended up breaking again to take the score up to 3 over DC, and DC just couldn't fight back after that deficit.
Yeah, definitely a highlight for Gridlock overall. Muddied the East Division picture for sure. Ends up not mattering because only the in-division games contribute to who wins the division, instead of deciding in the final weekend where all 3 of the main East Division teams are in play in one form or another. Instead, it's already over. Congratulations, DC. We're going to talk more, Sascha and I, when we have a little bit more time post D1 Nationals. We're going to get into thoughts, feelings, what it means when the divisions are decided by different tiebreakers and only in division games. So congrats to New York for winning that game with that incredible sequence. But congrats to DC for sealing the spot. That'll do it for us on this episode of Double Overtime presented by VC Ultimate. Keep an eye out on all of the Ultra World coverage for this upcoming weekend. I will be in Cincinnati covering the D1 Women's Division, so keep an eye on the site. And so many games are getting streamed and covered by Ultra World. So check out the different subscription offerings if you are not already a subscriber. There's also now apparently an event plan, so that is another possible option if you just want to catch the D1 College Championships. That'll do us. He's Sascha Vogel. I'm Jenna Weiner. Thank you so much again for joining us on Double Overtime.
Bye.